Hello and welcome to 1 Week Only. I'm Conor. Hello from self-isolation to all of our listeners out there. Hope we are staying safe and staying inside. Um, there are always new films coming to streaming these days. Lots of bigger films and also films that maybe have a big name distributor behind it or at least a big name actor. But I want to highlight a smaller film that you should really check out. It's a documentary called Riplist, which is directed by a friend of mine, Mike Scholtz, a friend of mine from the Fargo Film Festival. He's a Minnesota filmmaker I've known for several years, and he always finds really unique topics to explore with his films. He made a film called Lost Conquest years ago about the supposed, alleged Viking history of Minnesota and why people cling to it so much. He's also produced a great film called Wicker Kittens, which is about competitive puzzling. These are phenomenal films, and his new one, Riplist, is about a local group in Fargo, North Dakota, that has a celebrity death pool where once a year they get together and they do a fantasy football style list of famous people who are getting on in years and they predict will die in the next year. And every year they rank it up and see who won, who got the most correct. So it's a fascinating look into this, slightly morbid subject. These people who find a little joy in keeping track of obscure, aging celebrities, and but it digs in and finds the humanity, the humor, the quirkiness, and it's a really surprising, enjoyable film. And it was great to talk to Mike about how he found out about it and why he thinks Minnesota has so many great quirky subjects that he can make films about. And the film is now available through the new streaming site from the Twin Cities Film Festival, another film festival in Minnesota. So here's my interview with Mike Scholtz about his documentary Riplist.
Hi, I'm Mike Scholtz, and I am the aforementioned director of the documentary Riplist.
So, Mike, your documentary is about a celebrity death pool. So, how about you want to set up what a death pool is and how you first heard about it?
Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed to admit the first time I heard of it, I didn't really understand what it was, and apparently they're somewhat common, and there was even the Clint Eastwood movie, The Dead Pool, which was about a celebrity death pool. But it wasn't really in my, world. I had a friend that I met through attending the Fargo Film Festival in Fargo, North Dakota, who was in a celebrity death pool, but he kept this really quiet. This was Madeline, one of the characters in the film, or one of the actual human beings in the film. And he was kind of sheepish about it. He didn't tell people he was in a celebrity death pool, but I couldn't help but notice that his Facebook page was 50% reporting on celebrities who had died. And so I just had to confront him about this one day and tell him how creepy that was. And he, said, "Well, there's a reason for it. I'm in this celebrity death pool, and it's this competition where we, choose celebrities we think might die in the next year, and then when they do die, we get a point, and whoever gets the most points wins." And it was really sort of hyper aware of how insensitive that might sound. So I think that's why he doesn't tell people about it. But at the same time, he loves doing this. And once we started talking about it, we just couldn't stop talking about it. And, that's always, to me, a good indication that there might be an interesting documentary there, is if I can't stop thinking about it or asking questions about it, then hopefully the same will be, true for other people.
So you already knew Matt, but then when you thought of the idea of making a film about it, how did the other members of the death pool respond to this idea?
Yeah, when the first time Matt told me about it, we were at this bar in Carlton, Minnesota, and he, sort of explained the whole thing to me, and I immediately said, well, not immediately, after 5 hours, I said, "This seems like this would be a good documentary. Do you think the other people in the group would be okay with it?" And he was delighted by the idea that it could be a documentary. I think because he is a volunteer at a film festival and he loves documentaries, and I think this just sort of, was appealing to him. But he was worried about some of the other members of the group wanting to do it. Um, I was also worried that only one of the members of the group was not an older white man.
Mm.
There's only one woman in the group, and not long before I started this film, I just sort of said to myself, I don't want to make any more documentaries about old white men. I've kind of done a couple of those. I did one about some snowmobilers who went on an Arctic expedition, and that was all, older white men. And I did a film about Viking, people who are really into Viking culture in Minnesota. And that was, a lot of older white men. And I think older white men have had their day, And I just thought, if I'm going to make this film, I want to make sure that the only woman who's in the group is on board with it. I don't want to cut her out of the story. And it took some convincing, but she finally agreed. And then she ended up being a big part of the film, just because she had an interesting backstory and some strange ideas that just sort of made her sort of bubble to the top as one of the main people we were following.
Well, it's definitely a part of any documentary. You want people who are interesting in their own right, and what I love about this film is that often they'll have different opinions on things. You interview them separately, but they'll often sort of disagree or argue via interviews. And how was that when you're putting them together to realize they may be part of this group, but they have all very different opinions on why they're doing it and what drives them?
Yep. Yeah, I was really hoping to create some conflict in the film. Between the characters. I almost hate to call them characters because they're, people. But that's what you're looking for when you're making a documentary. You really are looking for interesting characters. And so I went into these individual interviews thinking ahead of time, all right, I got to ask them, how do you feel when someone that you've chosen dies? And some of them just said outright, oh, I feel elated when someone dies. And others were, had more complicated feelings about it. It was kind of sad to them. And I also wanted to ask them, I didn't open with this question, but I wanted to ask each one of them, what do you think happens to you when you die? And so, we get into these questions of faith and eternity and all this kind of stuff. And they had all kinds of different, ideas about that. And that really made the topic in the film, more interesting to make and hopefully more interesting to watch.
Now, this film definitely fits in along some other films. You have films about, like I said, snowmobilers. You have competitive jigsaw puzzling. You have Viking history. You always have the kind of a desire, it looks like, to find these unique kind of corners of society. You're not looking for the big, grand, documentary portrait of a celebrity. Is that what you prefer to find in your stories?
Yeah, I have never. I like watching, films about hard-hitting issues and films that are, kind of stating as their goal they want to change the world. But for some reason, I've always been more drawn to just weird people and their weird hobbies. Someone who did a story on me a couple of years ago said that it was almost like I was doing films on the activities that people occupy themselves with to sort of stave off the boredom of living in northern Minnesota. There's just sort of, jigsaw puzzling and deep dives into Viking history or snowmobiling or, death. These are very, very almost Nordic concerns, things that people who live up north and have too much time indoors in the winter might occupy themselves. I don't know if that's true, but I just I like weird people and their weird hobbies.
Do you think Minnesota is a little stranger than other states, or is that just because you just have digged in deeper to Minnesota, you found the weirdest corners?
Well, I would like to think Minnesota's a little stranger, but I live in Minnesota, so I might suffer from that sort of exceptionalism that I think Texans are really good at, thinking their state is, remarkable in some way. Although I do think there's a little bit of that in Minnesota. It's just, rooted in modesty and niceness and qualities like that. But I do think that, being a little further up north and not being on one of the coasts, and I feel like people in Minnesota have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder about some of these things, and so then I think that does maybe inspire some weirdness in them.
Now, at the end of the film, I don't want to spoil anything, but you do say you reached out to some celebrities and they did not respond. Is that true? Do you want to
That
say who you reached out to?
that is 100% true. I tried to reach out. Well, I did. I found contact info for a few people. Betty White, Angela Lansbury. Oh man, I'm trying to remember if it was Carl Reiner. There was a male celebrity too that I just, didn't hear back from. The only celebrity that I reached out to and actually heard back from was Norman Lloyd.
Oh wow.
Yeah, his son sent me a really nice letter that, now that I think back on it, probably was just sort of a form letter, but he said, "Oh, your project sounds really
Okay.
interesting and funny." And, unfortunately, my dad's not really doing interviews right now because Norman Lloyd is like 105
Yeah,
now, I think, or
it's crazy.
104. Yeah, and I mean, this was a couple of years ago. But yeah, when his son responded that he thought it sounded like a good project, I thought, boy, I don't know if you would think that this is a good project if I'm talking about your dad. But it was super nice of him to write back. It was a difficult email for me to write in the first place, and I tried to be upfront about what it was,
Mm-hmm.
but also I explained to everybody I really would love to get an interview with someone who was picked just to really stick it to the people in the Riplist group, to just make them think about the
Sure.
human consequences of some of their picks. Although I think some of them do think that and have some guilt, on a daily basis already anyway. But it would have been fun.
Now, how when you played at festivals, how was the reaction been from the audience, including the Free Range Festival, which is in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I volunteer at a festival. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere outside of Duluth, Minnesota. We do it in a barn, and since it was kind of one of the hometown screenings for it went over really well. People were laughing at it and responding really well. This happened when we played it at the Fargo Film Festival, where a lot of the people who are in it still live in Fargo, who are members of the Riplist group. It played really well there. I have noticed at some of the other festivals, it'll play, and it takes a couple of minutes before people sort of feel like they can give themselves permission to laugh at how awful some of the comments are. I don't. Maybe it's just my paranoid imagination, but I swear I hear jaws dropping at like the first minute or two of the film, because we really just dive in with one of the characters describing herself as a deaf cheerleader, and then she does sort of a super inappropriate cheer, and she's kind of doing it tongue in cheek, and she reveals she doesn't really feel that way. But it's a maybe for some audiences it's a tough opening for a film about death. But it's all fun. It's all in good fun.
Have you reached out to any other death pools around the country? Have you maybe perhaps shown them the film, or they reached out to you by chance?
Well, yeah, actually, it's invariably when it plays at festivals, someone from the festival will come up and tell me, kind of sheepishly, like Matt O'Lean did the first time he told me. They'll tell me, yeah, actually, we have a death pool, or my brother and I are in a death pool. And, obviously people who are in death pools are really interested in this film, because all death pools kind of do it in different ways. The one I covered, they don't put any money into it. It's just, bragging rights for as far as who wins. But a lot of other death pools will, they'll put in a certain amount of money, and they do it even more like fantasy football, leagues. And there's actual, money riding on the outcome. So I have talked to a few more. It's always interesting to see what they do.
Now I've heard that you've also now joined this pool. Is that correct?
That is true. They about halfway through the process of making the film, they invited me to join, and our producer Val Coit, and I said, man, I that feels like that's unethical for a documentary filmmaker, like halfway through the editing to just join the group. And so I said no, and then they asked again the following year, and I finally relented. I had mixed feelings about it, and it does sort of in some ways it sort of changes the way I felt about the movie. Actually being in it, I completely understand the complicated feelings that you have when someone on your list dies. I picked Honor Black, and she just recently died.
Oh yeah.
And the first thing I saw when I saw the news, I was like, oh man, I love her in Goldfinger. That's so great. That sucks. And then it took me like 10 full seconds to be like, wait a second, I think I picked her. Like I wasn't even 100% sure. So then I looked at the list and I had picked her, and then I just had to have a long talk with myself about, am I happy, or does this make me happy? I'm not sure it does. I think next time, if I do this again next year, I think I'm just going to pick like murderers and perhaps presidents that I don't particularly care for. That's maybe how I'll handle it next time. Is maybe a less admirable list.
Well, it is interesting to me. It is in some ways. It's about making a personal connection with a death. It reminds me, whenever like a celebrity dies, you'll post, "Oh, this is my favorite movie," or "Oh, I saw them at this event one time," or "Here's my photo with them."
Yep.
Everyone kind of wants a connection with death in some ways. So it's an extension of what people do already. It's just a more blunt way of addressing it.
Yeah, that's funny because we you probably remember it. One of the people in the film, Jason Branby, talks about that. He's like, we all want to make a mark on the world,
Yeah.
and a lot of us just can't. We're going to, but it's fun to talk about the people who do mark, and it is kind of a connection to them in a weird way, a very weird way.
So now the film is available to stream thanks to the Twin Cities Film Fest. How did that come about?
Yeah, so the coronavirus happened,
Yeah.
and a lot of people in the Minnesota film community were suddenly left at home with a lot less work. And I'm assuming the Twin Cities Film Fest had this idea
Mm.
in mind, for a while to kind of build a streaming platform that would really showcase Minnesota films and showcase Minnesota filmmakers. But I think the virus probably kickstarted that, or gave them maybe a clarity of purpose, because not long after I realized I was going to be spending a lot more time at home, they reached out to me and a lot of other Minnesota filmmakers and said, hey, would you be interested in sharing your work here? We're going to, make it clear that the artists get a, nice percentage of this money when you buy this film for $5.99. And, it's going to be entirely Minnesota filmmakers. And I just thought, man, that's such a cool idea, because Minnesota has lots of great film festivals and great audiences and a really great community. So, just being a sort of a proud Minnesotan, I was really excited about this.
Well, I'm so happy it's out there, and I really hope people check it out because it's a really terrific, funny, and thoughtful film. And also, your other films are available. Some of the other ones are available on Vimeo now, correct?
Yep, you can find, just search around, and they're in different places, all over the worldwide internet.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I appreciate it.
So, that was my interview with director Mike Scholtz about his documentary Riplist. As I said, you can find it through the Twin Cities Film Fest website. They are now have their own streaming site for Minnesota-made films, which is very cool. Really great to see them, debut this new way to support films, because you pay for these films and a portion of the sale goes to the filmmaker, just like the virtual cinema being done by Kino and Oscilloscope, other distributors. So it's great to see, in this really difficult time for filmmakers and film theaters, the way that people are finding a way to make sure everyone is supported and everyone can help each other out, and people can still see great movies. So if you're looking for a terrific, thoughtful, unique movie, check out Riplist, now streaming for rental online. That's all we have for this episode of 1 Week Only. As always, find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Give us a like or a share, retweet. Love to hear from you. Hear what you're watching at home. If you've checked out Zombie Child or Baccarat or any other great films that are now available online. And as always, there's no more episodes on iTunes and SoundCloud. We have lots of good stuff to listen to if you're looking for more podcasts to check out. But until next time, I'm Connor. Thank you for listening.